Good evening, everyone. So I think we have just about everyone here. 1, 2, 6, 10, 11, 12. Am I missing anybody?
Rich, John,
Leslie?
Dave McKenna.
Dave's here.
Dave's there.
Dave's here.
Oh, sorry.
And Leslie?
Leslie here?
Yeah.
Yep.
You want me to wait a few more minutes for them to come?
Well, we're streaming and recording right now.
Okay. So we're streaming and recording.
Yes.
All right. So I guess before I get into I sent the presentation out about 10 minutes ago, just for you to look back on. I would say that first of all, many thanks to Kevin. Kevin is here. He's behind the curtain, but Kevin, we spent the better part of the past few weeks really trying to nail down the best we can with numbers, and Rick's assistance as well. So many thanks to both of them for trying to identify the numbers we can, and trying to put together the best information we can with about 3.5 months worth of data. So I guess I would start and end this on the same comment that I started and ended last year's. Is there's a lot of uncertainty, and this is just a different type of uncertainty than this time last year. Last year we were in the middle of a shutdown in the economy, both statewide, nationwide, and while we're not in that same position, it's just a different level of uncertainty because there's an uncertainty as respect to how the economy will recover. We have our 4th or 5th stimulus package that's been passed. There's been a lot of funding that has been infused into the economy. There'll be a lot more coming in and a lot of different types of benefits. The question is will that carry over into a recovered economy post-pandemic? We don't know. So there's a lot of unknowns, and we just don't know how things are going to recover on the slow end, on the high end, in different markets and in different industries. So that pretty much sums up the next 58 slides that I'm going to talk about, but I'll get into a little bit more detail about some of the specifics as we have in the past. But there's a big unknown, Mark, and there's some nuances to it, particularly, and I'll talk more about it, like around sales tax and corrections and quarterly corrections, and the way the process the state does it is challenged because they use it on historical past years, which obviously last year was an anomaly. So I'll get into some of those details, but to start things off, it's just as uncertain as it was this time last year, just a different type of uncertainty. So why don't we just kick right off and we'll get right into it. Let me share my screen with everyone. And Kevin and Rick, if there's anything that I'm missing as we go through this, please let me know. I can't see everyone. I only have one screen in front of me, so I just have a small sidebar. So if there's questions, we can ask as we go. I think it's probably easier that way, if that's all right with you, Deborah.
That's fine, Jason.
This way we can kind of go through them as we go. So the 22 budget retreat. Usually when we start off, we go through some economic and fiscal indicators. One thing I like to kind of put out there ahead of time is this is not an economics class, so we could probably debate all day long whether unemployment means this or whether consumer confidence means that. I go through some general indicators that usually suggest market trends. The nuances of all of them can be arguable to a certain extent, but all of them cumulatively usually indicate certain directions that will ultimately have some impact on us. I also get into some of the indicators of need like SNAP, TANF, and safety net cases. So first is unemployment. Now, unfortunately, for whatever reason, either the federal government and or the state decided to change the way it determines unemployment in the midst of a pandemic. And hence, I can't collect the data the way I used to collect it. So one thing I'll share with you with this is, this was generally a slide I would typically show, and I could show you up to the last year. Unfortunately, 2020 they don't release the data in the same form where I had a really nice spreadsheet I could get month by month by month. They don't predict and they don't estimate unemployment in the same manner. However, pre-COVID, we were in a good position. Real low unemployment, the lowest has been in the recent history. Southern tier was doing well. We usually do better than the southern tier, and we usually do better than the state. that was the case. And then all of a sudden, the pandemic hit and everything went haywire. Nonetheless, we were still better than the Southern Tier and New York State, but still everyone saw unemployment triple or come close to tripling. And that's obviously shown here with April, which is following the March shutdown in May and June and July and so on and so forth. Then after this, it kind of gets a little odd because I can't get the data that we used to get in the same form or fashion. So in the new way they've provided data, I have February's. And I can compare 2020 February to 2021 February. I don't have January's. It wasn't released at that time, and we don't have March's yet. So unfortunately, over time, this new way of determining and the way they calculate unemployment will be able to update this sheet. And by this time, at the come budget time and the budget presentation, they'll have more months here. But this kind of shows you this is where we were as of February of last year. Here's where we are February this year. This is the state as of 20, and here's the state as of 21. Obviously, we're doing better than the state, which is great. And I imagine if the Southern Tier was out there, which it probably will at some point, it would be somewhere in between here, or maybe a little bit higher than the state. But for now, we're doing fairly well. And as the unemployment numbers are produced in more volume, I'm sure they will be able to provide more information about trends. They're also looking at job creation numbers. So I would bet that by fall time, this type of discussion may have a few extra slides to it to talk about job creation and job gain versus job loss just as much as unemployment rate. But all in all, probably we're faring better than most in the state of New York with respect to unemployment. Could be better though, but better than most. Inflation will be different this year. Inflation for the past few years has floated around 2% or just below 2%, which is generally about where you want it. Inflation, again, is the increase in cost of goods. If any of you are doing home renovations, you will notice that there's probably 100 to a 400% increase in material goods and costs. So supply is constrained in many markets, and therefore price goes up. Cost of goods goes up, and inflation is up a little bit higher. This will come into more discussion. We'll talk a little bit more about the tax cap, but right now, as of March to March, inflation was 2.6%, which was higher than it was in March a year ago. And I think it'll probably be above 2% for the year. Consumer confidence has to do with consumers and their confidence in spending currently and what they foresee in the future. Obviously, doing very strong over 18 and 19. Then you saw a big dip come mid last year, which would be following the post shutdown in the middle of the pandemic, and then it started to grow back a little bit more. Obviously, the higher consumer confidence, the better it is economy-wise. People are spending more money, hence more money being spent, more goods being purchased, more sales tax generated, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So while not as good as we were 2 years ago, obviously it's good to see. We want to see this line go back up this way. Dow Jones, I can't explain it. I don't know anybody that can, but you had the largest single dip in the economy, followed by the next day by the largest single growth in the economy in terms of the Dow Jones in March of last year, and then just been a steady growth, that's improved. I'm not even going to get into a conversation as to whether we think it's going to continue to grow, to level off, to drop. This is a good indication. Growth is a continuing good indication that as the market begins to open up a little bit more. Obviously, we'd like to see it sustain, and generally, incremental growth is always a positive thing. So now those are just general indicators of the economy. I think inflation will come back, and we'll talk a little bit more about inflation and what that means. And obviously unemployment probably ties into indicators of need a little bit more. So we're going to talk about SNAP cases, which is food stamps. We'll talk about TANF, which is temporary assistance for needy families, which is a federal benefit. And then we'll talk about safety net, which is the state benefit, which is generally the subsequent benefit to TANF. So SNAP or food stamps, down since 2018, but obviously up since January of last year. Still higher than it was when we say pre-recession. It's actually 2 recessions ago in 2008. That used to be the pre-recession discussion. SNAP applications have decreased when enhanced unemployment benefit was offered. So this is SNAP applications 2019 compared to 2020. As you can see, SNAP applications dipped in these years and then spiked in 2020, then spiked again following the expiration of that first enhanced benefit at the end of July. And generally, applications are indications of 30 to 45 days out of what may ultimately turn into cases. So here we are with cases. As you can see, SNAP cases were lower in that enhanced benefit period of time here compared to 2019. And then it shot back up as that enhanced unemployment benefit went away. And now you've started to see SNAP cases are higher than they were in 2020, which is pre-pandemic in January and February and March, but better than they were in 2019. I'm going to go through TANF and safety net first, and then I'll talk a little bit about what we think is happening as a result, as why you're seeing some lower cases, and that predominantly has to do with the eviction moratorium. So TANF is the temporary assistance for needy families. It's family assistance. There's a 5-year lifetime benefit on this. This is no cost to the county. The county administers it, but it's no cost to us. And as you've seen, it continues to decline. But the total number of public assistance cases, which is TANF and safety net, stays around level. I say that's pre-COVID times, but yet your proportion of safety net is higher. Safety net, we pay a share of. I'll get to that in a second, but it just goes to show you that total public assistance cases haven't changed a whole lot, but yet our local share, or the amount that we're responsible for, has. TANF cases, again, you saw 2020 were a little bit lower than 19, primarily because a lot of it was safety net related, or there were some other financial assistance, perhaps in the enhanced benefit, that folks didn't receive. And now you're seeing lower TANF cases again over the past 2 years. Again, this I think is going to talk, and we'll talk about in a second when I show you safety net, but I think it has to do with the eviction moratorium. Safety net cases, again, all over the board a little bit, but we've seen an increase since 2008 in terms of the share of it. Again, local share is 71%, so we pay 71% of safety net cases, and 29% is paid by the state. And then as you can see here again, safety net relatively low, and then again, safety net in 2021 is lower than it was in 2020, 2019. So part of the thought process behind this, and I talked to Kit this morning just to double check what we were learning, is that we think that the eviction moratorium has freed up buying power in individual families. So rather than them paying it on rent, they're able to use it for living expenses that otherwise they would maybe mainly go to SNAP benefits, or possibly some other safety net functions, or TANF benefits. But as a result of the eviction moratorium, they have additional buying power available to them. So there's two schools of thought. Well, there's one school of thought on this, and that is that when the eviction moratorium expires, there's a lot of other individual benefits that are available now. There's rent assistance, and then there's some expanded personal benefits. As they begin to trickle, and become smaller and smaller and smaller, the intent is that will carry over into a point to where the economy has recovered, a post-COVID recovery, and therefore there won't be this huge spike in public assistance needs that are currently being offset by other types of public assistance, or more public assistance in the past. So as public assistance that is now what I'll call enhanced begins to go down, the expectation is that the economy will grow out of this recession, so to speak, a post-COVID recession, and therefore you won't have a huge spike in public assistance cases. Yet to be seen, but that's a big part of some of the discussion around rental assistance, around some of the enhanced personal benefits, and that have been passed through, whether it's CARES funding or whether it's through this American Recovery Plan, and so on and so forth. So the fact that you're seeing lower cases now, we think, is temporary. Obviously, there's always a certain part of the population that is living in a very volatile personal circumstance where something could put them into a bad financial position. We'll wait and see as these public assistance benefits, these enhanced benefits, start to go away, whether or not you start to see spikes in this. But what Kit and DSS is probably saying is that these numbers here will probably grow as that enhanced public assistance begins to fade away. Something to keep an eye out for. Yes.
Excuse me. Did you say you were okay with questions as you go on?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's interesting. So you're saying people because of the moratorium, people felt they could take their rent money and pay for food. That's basically what you're saying?
I think they have more spending power to do other things that they would otherwise be spending on rent.
But then when the moratorium is over and the rent is due, that money is gone.
It could be that. It's also a combination of the fact that there's job loss. So for example, folks that may have been working 2 jobs may only be able to have 1 job. So that may also trigger a spike in cases as well. There isn't any clear-cut reason or explanation of it. I think it's probably a combination of a lot of factors, and it may be regional or localized based on that region. But there's a few things going on here that's not necessarily consistent in the past.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yep. And I think the other thing I will say is that the lower wage job market has been hit particularly hard through this recession. So whether or not that revives itself or comes back, maybe, like I said, maybe the difference between a family that, someone who works 2 jobs to make ends meet may only have the opportunity to have 1 job. That may also trigger a spike in these types of public assistance cases once some of those enhanced benefits fade away. Here kind of shows you the proportional difference, a clear shift of increased safety net cases while there's decreased TANF cases. I'm going to use this as a pre-COVID, predicated with a pre-COVID expectation. It's going to take you 12 to 36 months to kind of see how things balance out, whether or not you fare, how the community fares following COVID as to what's that new level of public assistance. Does it kind of right itself again? Does it not? Does it get worse? Does it get better? I don't know. One thing I do know is that, you're going to continue to probably have an increased safety net proportion of total public assistance cases, as total assistance cases, which means you're going to be paying a greater local share as time goes on. One other thing that we have noticed at DSS is that more people are calling about benefits where they may not have in the past, not necessarily applying, but inquiring, which would lead one to suggest that when enhanced benefits do start to fade away, or there may be an interest, there may be a greater application or more applications coming in for assistance. So there's a lot of moving parts to this from a public assistance perspective that we're going to have to watch closely as we go through. And we'll, this is data that we regularly put together now, so we can continue to monitor this as the information comes out. It's it's fairly current as well. So other fiscal drivers, so other things that go into kind of the bigger picture when we look at budget impacts are as you all know, sales tax. So sales tax is the second biggest revenue next to property tax for our budget. Excuse me, a little history on average. The past decade, you've had a growth of about 2%. 15 years was 2.5%. There's 3 exceptions in there, 2009, 15, 16. And interesting, you have a dips in those years, but you also have 15, you had a little more than a 2% dip, a 0.5% dip in 16, and then 17, 18, 19, strong growth years. A little downward trend in growth, which I think we talked about over that time frame, particularly putting the 2020 budget together. We expected growth to not be this robust in 2020 had we not had a pandemic, and then obviously COVID hit and took all of our good estimating and threw it out the window. And we had a 12% dip in sales tax compared to the prior year for 2020. So now we look at January through March. We have January through March comparisons, and the 2021 January through March comparison compared to 2019, 18, and 17 in those same months kind of paints an interesting picture. January through March of 2020 compared to 21, we were, 21 compared to 20 is that we were about 4% below 20 for that January through March timeframe. 0.63% below 19, and then it would suggest that we're doing better than we were in 18 and better than we were doing in 19 for those same months. However, the correction process that takes place, the quarterly reconciliation that really looks at December, January, February months is done in our March numbers. And the reconciliation process, without getting into a dissertation, and Dave Lucas is the one that can explain this the best, is that they use prior year's history for a reconciliation process when they're balancing counties in New York City from a quarterly reconciliation of sales tax. Reconciliation has to do with a series of corrections based on reporting and actuals, because it's always a delayed process. And what has been across the board common with this reconciliation is most counties have seen an odd growth for this reconciliation because it's based off of an anomaly of last year. NISAC has talked with tax and finance, and they are probably going to have to change or do something different for the reconciliation processes because it's just not working the way it normally would with COVID because of last year. That's going to be huge influxes, particularly in the months coming when we look at last year. So bottom line is while what January through March is suggesting, if it were to continue on that same trend, we may come in at a 2018, 2019 equivalent of sales tax that could be drastically off. We don't know until we start to see how this reconciliation process is corrected for the next quarter. So after we get April, May, and June, you get a half year under our belt. Going into the 2022 budget process, we'll probably have a better understanding of how this is going to fluctuate. One thing we do know is that we're still what appears to be at the bottom of sales tax performance compared to other counties. We were the worst in 2020. No county fared worse than us. And right now we're, I think, the bottom 2 or 3 compared to the first 3 months compared to last year. I would say that a big part of that, and this is all localized too, depending on your region or what impacts you. I think a big part of that had to do with higher ed and probably the lack of in-person graduation in May, and then a huge amount of drop off of business travel and regular business that Cornell has, which probably does a lot for local spending, as well as other businesses. So, the fact that there's going to be some form of quasi in-person graduation, even though it's only one person, I assume families will be coming into the area, maybe a good jumpstart to the tourism year. But nonetheless, we're just going to have to wait and see how the next few months fare. I'll get into what we did for projecting when we get down to sales tax later in the presentation. Point is it's still really unstable and inconsistent because the reconciliation process is different. One thing that we do know is that the state of New York is going to divert about $700,000 worth of sales tax that they didn't divert in the past. That has to do with this distressed hospital fund that no one knows how to access, and that NA made. The only bright side of that is that because we performed so poorly in sales tax last year, it's going to be $250,000 less than what was estimated last year when it first started, and because it's based on prior year sales tax performance. So we saved $250,000 there by not paying them as much because sales tax performance was so poor last year. So if there's an optimistic side to things, they're not taking as much as they thought they were going to take. They'll take it from somebody else. But that's yet to come. We do have a schedule on this. Rick and I have the schedules emailed. I think February's had one payment, the next payment's in May. So it's like 6 or 7 payments split up between the two different diversions. And we did assume another bright side when we projected the 21 sales tax numbers. We assumed a $900,000 diversion or a little bit more than that based on the estimates we had. And obviously right now it's going to be less than that. So, already we're starting off with less diversion than we anticipated, which, can only help us in the long run. Another thing that's kind of thrown a twist in things is the Medicaid weekly share. Interesting little mystery about weekly share. So I think most of you know that every week we pay the state of New York our weekly share for Medicaid costs. That's been capped to a certain extent. And pre-COVID, pre this enhanced FMAP, we had our weekly share was about $219,000. And that usually doesn't fluctuate a whole lot from year to year. It fluctuates based on how many weekly payments, when a Tuesday payment falls on the year, it determines if we make an extra payment every year. But when all of a sudden the first CARES Act came into play, there was some enhanced EFMAP funding that we were to receive. And that was a 6.2% enhancement. And then you start to see your weekly shares drop as a result of that. And here's where it dropped to from July 1st of 20 to March 31st, 21. And that will continue, we think, for the vast part of this year. And it dropped $40,000. Well, that is well above what we anticipated for the 6.2% enhancement that we would get. And the school of thought that both our Tom Hurden over at DSS has, as well as Dave Lucas at the state, is that we think that the state is being more honest on their general EFMAP reimbursement or aid that they're supposed to be providing us. If you all remember, we're in a FOIL dispute with them right now about 4 years of reconciliation. It would appear that perhaps we're getting a little bit more EFMAP aid, which is decreasing our weekly shares, or we're getting a little bit more EFMAP allotment than we normally have in the past. It's impossible to tell because the state doesn't break out how much this this decrease is attributed to. Is it how much is attributed to the 6.2%? How much of it is attributed to something else? Dave Lucas and Tom Hurden have a little better understanding as to how those costs and reimbursement are split out, but both of them have and separately came up with this. I verified it with both of them. They both agreed that there's some type of other enhancement that's coming that's decreasing our weekly shares, and one would suggest that it has to do with the ACA regular EFMAP aid or reimbursement that we get that perhaps we're maybe starting to get a little bit more of that the state was withholding in the past. The state has not shared with us whether or not this is the reconciliation of prior years. They have not shared with us that they're changing it all, but this alone does not equals well over what we would have gotten through the 6.2%. So long story short is we didn't change Medicaid. We kind of kept it flat for 2022, even though we think that even after this enhanced EFMAP aid goes away, we think that the weekly share will go down a little bit because the regular ACA EFMAP will be more than what we've received in the past.
Excuse me, Jason. So this says through March 31st, 2021. So does that mean our shares have gone up again now?
No, this was extended because the public health crisis was extended. So remember, the enhancement was attached to as long as the public health emergency was extended. And
Okay.
I think it will most likely be extended through most of this year.
Okay. So you're saying that you thought we were supposed to get 6.2% enhancement. We're getting 18.4% enhancement? Is that what
I don't know if there's a direct correlation between this. This is the decrease in weekly share, compared to that.
Okay.
But this does not constitute, the 2% enhancement does not constitute a $40,000 drop in weekly share. There's something else in there.
This sure looks like a job for the comptroller's office.
Yeah, I mean, we've as you say, I think I've shared with you the FOIL request we've gone back and forth on. Yeah, there's a lot of school of thought behind this. Part of it could be that the governor doesn't want to continue to pick this fight. He's got other fights to pick. I don't know. The point is this is going to be a kind of a new year, a new base year setting for Medicaid. So we'll see how everything fares in the next 3 or 4 months. Things may change and may come a lot. We may get some more information that clarifies what 22 will look like. But for this purpose, we did not add anything to Medicaid. We said, let's just let it lie and let's see what happens, because we think it's probably going to decrease a little bit, even after this COVID enhancement goes away.
Okay.
The bright side about this is that, this COVID enhancement helped us, not expend as much money. We saved some money last year. We'll save some money this year. So it'll help minimize any negative impacts that we had from COVID last year. And it'll help us this year build some surplus for the end of the 2021 budget. Capital, I did not really do much with capital, but just wanted to put a reminder in here. Our capital plan continues to be robust. This current year budget that you adopted assumes an $8 million transfer over a multi-year period of time of fund balance as well as capital fund capital fund reserves. We'll talk about a little bit later, but when the American Rescue Plan, our funding comes into play, I think this is a good candidate to try to capture as much as you can to support your capital program. That being said, I think there's an opportunity, if you can capture a lot of it, to possibly decrease your annual share or the annual contribution as you move on. So it may have a permanent, structural impact to your budget that you can fund some project with cash versus funding them with debt or with just less debt, which is a good structural change to your budget long term. Tax cap formula. I always like to remind you how easy it is to put the tax cap together. It takes Kevin about 5 minutes. Bada bing, bada boom, he's done. Not the case, obviously, but always a reminder of the state making it simple for us. This right now, the tax cap calculation has about a 2.35% increase over the current levy, or 1.2 million. I think this will change for two reasons. One, I think inflation, as I mentioned earlier, is going to come in over 2%. Right now, when we put this estimate together, we use the average inflation of the past 6 years, which was like 1.6, 1.7. I don't think you're going to be there. I think you're going to be above 2%, which means if you remember, the tax cap takes 2% or whatever's lowest. And if it's above 2%, that will be what you will get. You'll get 2%. So I think that is going to, if it's at a 2% rate, or inflation's higher than 2%, you're going to have a 2% number in there, which means that will increase your tax cap capacity. I also think that the sales tax credits are going to be higher than what we put in there. Sales tax credits have to do with towns that choose not to take the cash for sales tax from us, but ask that we apply it towards the county tax rate in their jurisdiction. That's a tax credit or a sales tax credit. I think it'll be higher than what we put in the estimate. When it's higher compared to last year, it will increase that tax cap capacity. So my guess is that this is going to be between probably 2.5% and 3% of a tax cap, probably in the 2.75 range, if I had to take a guess. But I do think it's going to be higher than this estimate right now. And it usually changes, as you know, it usually goes up. No Dryden factor this year, like we had a few years ago where it shot up due to some changes in them. So no more Dryden factor. I don't think we'll see that again. So now we'll get into kind of the budget drivers. And this has to do with local costs that we fund. So we break this down into maintenance of effort, meaning what it will continue to what it will cost us next year or not cost us to continue the same level of service that we have. And then there's a few kind of beyond maintenance of effort issues that are worth bringing up. And I think this year it's a little different conversation. So we'll talk about that as well. And it's really what local cost means. So how is this going to impact the levy? As we go through this, keep in mind when you see parentheses around a number, that's good. That means it brings the levy down. When you don't see parentheses, it's bad. That means it adds cost to the levy. So parentheses good, no parentheses bad. Some assumptions, we put wage settlements in there. I expect you might settle 2, maybe 3, all 3 contracts this year, depending on where we are with things. We have an arbitration that's pending with the deputy sheriffs. Possibly maybe more than the statutory 2 years. We may be able to get a multi-year deal out of it. We do have a proposal on the table with white collar, and the corrections unit, it'll actually be in budget, capital, and personnel, are finally organizing themselves to form the union. They fired the last 2 unions that represented them, so they've organized themselves. That resolution will come in front of budget, capital, and personnel on the 10th. And once they become formalized, we might be able to get back to the table with them. Nonetheless, we did put some wage settlement parameters in there. Retirement costs. Retirement's interesting. So we've enjoyed a relatively flat blended rate over the past several years. Even though the economy has done really well, I think our retirement costs will increase slightly, even though you had a 30% growth in the retirement fund this year. Performance was really good in terms of performance in the retirement fund because of the market. That said, several offsetting factors. Number one, the comptroller has been pretty aggressive and consistent that over the past 5-6 years, as the economy has been growing, they have shrunk the annual expected return on the retirement fund. And they've done that to try to make it more practical and conservative in terms of expectations of return on the retirement fund. So before they were at a 7.5 annual return, and now they're getting around to a 6. I think they're 6.5. I think they're trying to get it down to a 6% annual return. And that's to probably right size expectations through a stabilized or a more consistent market turnaround on a year-to-year basis. So while the growth has been good, and that generally would drive down the employer costs or local costs, the fact that they're ratcheting down the annual return eats some of that away. So I think the rates will stay relatively flat, maybe dip a little bit. We would see some decrease in addition to that due to folks that have retired, generally have left from tier 4 possibly tier 3 and tier 2 through the retirement incentive. And any positions we replaced would come back as tier 6. So tier 6 is a less costly plan than a tier 4 plan or tier 3 or tier 2 plan. So we would normally see some benefits of that. That said, I think we are going to see some labor settlements, which would be good this year. And I think you'll see an increase in retirement costs as a result of retroactivity and ultimately an increased retirement cost as a result of that retro settlement. So all in all, I think it's a slight increase in retirement costs. Kevin has really been sharp. I don't know how he projects it, but sometimes he's like, less than $20,000 off on a $6.5 million bill. So I trust his judgment on this one. I think we'll see a little bit of an increase, but that's a little bit more logic than you probably want to hear behind it. But that's kind of what's going on with the retirement rates. Healthcare premiums we kept at 5%, which seems to be the average for the healthcare consortium, which is good. Medicaid again kept flat for weekly shares. Capital spending we did increase 0.5% of the prior year's levy, like we have done in the past prior to 2019. There's a decrease in some doer grant revenue, and sales tax growth is inconsistent, but we have some growth there. So wages, again, local impact, a little bit of wage growth here. There's been some correction of this too. So while we think that there's some settlements that are going to be coming, you've also, remember, we decreased the workforce by about 6%. So we have 47 equivalent, FTE equivalents that are no longer on the payroll. So that offset whatever increase in wages. That said, it's about $130,000 increase total net change in wages, which is low considering the size of the workforce. Pension, again, here's your pension cost, a little bit of an increase in pension costs. We'll see how that fares, and obviously we'd like to have those settlements with those contracts so that we can get up to date, and we're not estimating based on multiple year retroactive payments. This is employer and retiree healthcare. Small increase in healthcare costs. Again, I think the retiree healthcare cleanup that the legislature did in July, I think it was really, I think you'll see a very leveling of these costs and not going up, by the cost of the plans, because you're going to have folks that are going to be switching over to a Medicare supplement plan. Your younger retirees, as they shift over into that. Anybody retiring in the near future, which I think you may see a little bit of a slowdown. They're going to be going to the platinum plan rather than a higher, cost retirement plan. So all in all, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, you'll see this kind of very, minimal, very limited growth, if not any, because of those changes, which I think is a good thing. And then hopefully over time, with all the union proposals we have, all shifting everyone over to the platinum plan from the classic blue and PPO, which is a much less costly but more beneficial plan for employees and the employer. So I think as that shift continues, you'll see a positive. This will have limited growth, which is good. This is the capital plan increase. Again, it's the contribution that you put towards your capital program. It involves, really two things. Some are for immediate projects or contributions to immediate projects. The other portion has to do with debt service, with your existing debt. In the past, we had increased this going into 19, I think. No, was it 20? We increased it pretty robustly to be able to really make an approach to the green facilities becoming net zero by 2035. We had to ratchet that back a little bit last year, coming into this year's budget 21 because of just everything that's changed with our budget. This is continuing to go back to the 0.5% growth factor and trying to increase that capital contribution. Again, this could change between now and the fall, because if the ARP funding comes out and we have the ability to dedicate it towards more of these capital projects, there should really be a concerted effort to look at, can we at least keep level or maybe not increase our capital contribution on a multi-year basis, because we'll be paying cash for capital for some of these projects versus having to levy money for it. So some things to think about and balance as we look at this stimulus money. Town plowing costs, again, this is a lot of roads that we contract with the towns to plow county roads. This goes up a little. This fluctuates from year to year depending on a multitude of factors, but generally it's pretty known by the time, because it's paying for last year, so it's a little bit of an increase. Nothing huge though. DSS mandates, so this has to do with anywhere from family assistance, Medicaid, childcare, a lot of primarily DSS mandates, all DSS mandates, some slight increase in mandates. I think most of you know by now that this can be changing based on multiple fiscal years. So the state fiscal year, the federal fiscal year, all of them on different fiscal years than our fiscal year. So, this is kind of a very, very rough, broad shot at this early in the game. Generally, DSS, Kit and Tom and Dina, are able to refine this more. And there are always kind of little things that pop up that we can never predict. But right now, I would say for the past few years, we've had limited mandate increases, less than 1%, less than 2%, which is pretty good considering what you were probably faced with, 6, 7, 8 years ago. Health mandates, again, medical examiner costs, early intervention, a little bit of an increase here. We're still kind of right size in the medical examiner program. If you remember, we shifted over to contracting it, which is probably the better way to do it. So there's some increased costs related to that, but nothing significant. Other mandates. So assigned counsel saw a big jump this year, or an anticipated jump. We anticipated jump because the poverty levels increased for family court. So we're expecting more cases as a result of that. Talked to Lance a little bit about this. He thinks it will spike in 22 or spike in 21, possibly level out in 23. So we kind of picked a little bit of a number where we think it's going to level at. It's possible that depending on how this year goes, this might require a one-time OTR for 22 to get us over a little bit of a hump until it starts to level off again. But we think this is where the leveling mark is. So we'll keep an eye on it and see how things pan out, how court pans out and what type of activity assigned counsel has. College chargebacks, we've been budgeting a little more than we have actually paid out. So we kept it flat this year, anticipating that there probably will be increased community college participation. Remember, this is for our folks that go outside the county to another community college that are Tompkins County residents. We've been budgeting a little higher than what we've actually spent. So we think keeping it level this year with the expectation that we'll probably see some increased use in community colleges. Community colleges, I think, are probably going to be a key component to workforce training and workforce coming back to work. So, we want to keep that flat. 730 mental health expenses. This has to do with folks that are not fit to be able to stand trial. They're hospitalized. If you remember last year, we generally prior to that was paying a 50-50 split with the state. Last year, the state changed it and put the whole 100% on us. It's a little high now, so we decreased it a little bit compared to the past 2 years. That said, this is one of those things that one individual or two individuals for a period of time could opt, this is a sporadic budget that has little consistency to it, but we think that we're at a decent place now to see how the next year pans out. Sales tax. So sales tax is a difficult thing to predict. We talked a little bit about what we know to date. We generally have been conservative on sales tax budgeting and estimating. 2021, I think we found a decent spot. I'm trying to recalibrate as to what we think we're going to land. We're starting to see, starting to see the economy open up. We're starting to see activity open up again, all positive, but right now have very little information to be able to make a well-educated guess. When I look at, whoops, that's not the one I want. Sorry. When I look at this slide here, for some historical perspective, I looked at points in when sales tax dipped into the negatives in prior years, right? So I look at 2009 recession, you had a decrease in sales tax, followed by 1, 2, 3, 4 years of growth on average, a little bit over 3%. I look at the dip in 2015, followed by a little less or a flat year, 1, 2, 3 years of growth on average, about a little just under 4% growth. If I look at the same type of approach that takes place after this dip, which is obviously significantly more than anything else, and a little different as to what caused it, there's no precedent to predict growth. But if we look at a rather aggressive growth, a 4.5% to a 5% growth a year, with 21 being a little bit less than that, so on average about a 4.13% growth, you can see you're at a pre-pandemic recovery of sales tax between 23 and 24. And that seems to be what most folks, the state included, are saying, that we are going to be at a pre-pandemic recovery between 23 and 24. Okay. I have no idea if that's accurate. I've heard it a lot of times. I'm sure you've all read it too. But when we start looking at how these sales tax numbers are coming in over the course of the next few months, we're going to get a feel, hey, we're really on point with 21's projections or we're not, and then you'll be able to do a course correction. But if I look at this type of model and use a 23-24 correction point, meaning somewhere in this time frame, you're going to be at where you were in 2000, at the end of 2019, going into 20. I think you're at a safe bet to say these are going to be 4 to 5 year % growth in sales tax. So in this case, we estimated a 4.5% growth over 2021. It's not unheard of. It's definitely more than most communities would expect, but keep in mind, you were coming off 3 years of pretty aggressive growth, 17, 18, and 19. And frankly, had a pandemic not happened, you probably would have, gone over 4% or come close to 4% for a 2020 growth. So, taking in the thought that there's probably some pent up demand, there's definitely opportunity. Domestic travel is more likely than other travel. Tourism may start to pick up a little bit more. We think 4.5% is probably a safe bet with the information that we know today. Obviously, the next several months will help us refine this more as we start to get into the fall budget. So this is kind of, I think I put this together for the budget time as well. This is a slide I put together and I updated it to kind of show how we think things can happen. This line is obviously the growth or change in % compared to the prior year. So that's what that orange line is. And then these bar graphs is where sales tax has been dollar wise. Again, this just kind of shows you some recovery modeling. Again, it's all modeling based on what we know today. And as I mentioned earlier, before all this, it's uncertain, just as we were this time last year. It's just a different type of uncertainty. But this is suggesting we could, we're at a recovery to 2023, tail end of 23, going into 24, which is consistent with a lot of estimates. So other drivers that impact local share. We decreased contingency by $1 million. Because before, if you remember, we put 1.9 million, we decreased it by $1 million. We don't anticipate that we would need that extra contingency. At that time, when we put it in there, we were anticipating significant reductions in state aid. We were anticipating at that time, we had no understanding if there was going to be any additional stimulus. We just didn't know a lot of things that were going on. It was a good precaution to take, but we don't think we need to do it moving into 22. Do a revenue change. So this is part of a multi-year process. If you remember, several years back, there had been some use of the interoperable grant that was being used to offset some operating costs. We have slowly weaned off of that so that grant could be solely dedicated to repair and replacement of equipment and supporting the backup dispatch center. This is the last year of basically, committing that grant funding that we get annually for those purposes. So it takes it out of the target. And then the unallocated revenue, this is a blend of multiple things. It has to do with the removal of the $1.3 million of appropriated fund balance that the legislature appropriated to help bring down the tax increase last year. So it removes that out of unallocated revenue. You're also seeing some increases in some small revenues, clerks revenues, transfer revenues, and we are expecting some increase in casino revenue. We started seeing that go up towards the tail end of last year, when they opened up. So we think that will increase. We don't think it will increase to the 2 million it was at pre-COVID, but we do think we added some additional revenue there for casino growth because we think that revenue is going to go up a little bit. All in all, netting out, parentheses is good, about $500,000 to the good, which will help drive down the levy. So here's kind of the tally of it. Again, this is all maintenance of effort. This is to continue the services that we're providing now, the same way we provide next year. You're about $1 million levy increase, which is about a 1.8%, 8.9% levy increase. So what's interesting about this is had we not used $1 million of fund balance last year to offset the levy, and we funded that increase in contingency with levy dollars, we removed that contingency growth in this proposed budget, you probably would not have a tax increase in 2022 based on this model right here. Meaning your maintenance of effort, you would have already increased the levy enough You would have taken that $1 million of extra expense out of the contingency, and it would have been supplanted with this increased maintenance of effort cost had we not done that. We didn't do that. We subsidized the levy, we decreased the levy. So in this case, it's about the equivalent of that $1 million to increase the levy to maintain services moving into 2022. So that's maintenance of effort. Generally, there's a few other things we like to talk about that's a little beyond maintenance of effort. There's supported agencies, or sponsored agencies, I should say, not supported. Sponsored agencies. Here are our sponsored agencies all over here that we usually provide some level of funding and support for. TCAD, or now the IAED agreement. So we put a 2% increase for sponsored agencies, equal about 120,000. I'm going to get into this a little bit more because I think there's some more work to be done with this. I'll give you some suggestions to think about. TCAT, TCAT, we did not put an increase in here for underwriter share. We're yet to know what that'll happen. I think it's probably too early for TCAT to be able to give us that estimate. So we didn't put anything in there. And TC3, generally we've talked about a 2% increase. I had a brief conversation with some staff at TC3. At this time, it's still a little early, so I didn't put anything in there for that. And probably, you may see some one-time requests come from TC3, and you might see nothing coming this year. We don't know yet, but I didn't make an estimate with either of them because they both received pretty considerable doses of federal aid, and we don't know how they're going to fare. And then there's yep.
Are you in contact with the county administrator in Cortland at this point?
I have not talked to Rob yet about this. I usually am, Mike, I usually am when we get close to the budget time. I haven't called Rob about this part yet, just because I don't think they've started. They usually don't think about their budget until July, but I'll probably touch base with Rob anyways in the next few weeks. I can definitely ask him is what he's thinking. But we'll go from there. But I haven't talked to him yet.
Thanks.
Yep. And then restoration of some departmental target funding. So, if you remember last year or this year, you adopted a budget that took some target funding out of multiple departments and agreed that in the OTRs we replaced it with one-time funding, one-time OTRs that over the next 1 to 3 years we would slowly incorporate that target funding back into their budgets. Facilities, personnel, training costs, DSS, the COPS program, sheriff's office. So, and I have those listed out here. So we did a memo on it. We talked about how we would slowly incorporate that funding back into the target budget. And this is the first of the 3-year reincorporation or restoration of that funding in those departmental budgets. Oh, here it is. I'm sorry. Here's the facilities budget, human resources, sheriff's office,
Jason,
social.
can I
Yep.
interrupt you?
Yeah, Amanda's got a question and
Oh,
then
I'm sorry.
Martha does as well.
Yeah, just back on that. So the restoration of the departmental budgets, that's just for our departments. That's not for the sponsored agencies, or?
Right. I have when I get to the sponsored agencies, I have another approach that I'm going to suggest for the legislature.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yep. This is just target for our departments, restoration for our departments.
Okay.
So my question is related to that. Could you go back the other slide? So that 120,000, 2% increase, is that on top of what the budget was supposed to be for 2020 before the cuts, or is
No,
that
it's
2%
based
on top of?
It's on top of your 21 adopted.
On top of the 21 adopted. Okay, but does that include, remember we cut during 2020?
Correct.
So please remind me, does the 2021 adopted, did that restore them back to the baseline that had, I should know this, but I'm having trouble with it.
That's all right. No.
The 2021, did we restore them back to what they would have had without the cuts?
No, we cut them 12%, just like we cut all the other departments.
In 2021.
Yes.
So this is 2% above the 12% cut.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So if we were to add these costs into your beyond, beyond maintenance of effort, it would add about another, 400,000 to the levy, which adds another 0.77% to the levy growth. Adding both of them up, if you were to combine the maintenance of effort, the agencies, and department restoration, you would be at around a $1.4 million local cost increase, or just under 2.7% growth in the levy. Here were the fiscal targets over the past several years. If you remember, we didn't have one for 21 because we had multiple budget discussions at that time. So when we talk about choices, what to do next, and I'm going to get to the sponsored agencies and tourism in a little bit. So hold your thoughts, Amanda and Martha. So we have more to talk about with that. When we talk about cutting expenses, you're really only able to cut local costs. So when we talk about mandated responsibilities have to do with mandated services of which you have some level of authority over how you provide those services. So for example, probation is a mandatory service. How many probation officers you have is really up to you. Discretionary has to do with just general discretionary funds. So for example, here's an example of mandated services versus discretionary services. And where those two lines meet, depending on where you can cut and where you can't cut. A lot of the mandates have to, it's up to your discretion as to how you provide the service, but you're mandated to provide the service. And then here's a scenario we give. We can come back to this, plus once we get through some of the discussion, we kind of show you where this is on the board. If you were to just support maintenance of effort as we go through, and again, this is preliminary. What this would mean with levy impact, what it would mean to the average home, or to the impact on the median homeowner of $200,000. What would happen if you did the cap? And then here's what would happen if you did maintenance of effort plus agencies plus department restoration. And this is the impact on a median home of $200,000 a year. And then we kind of give you some perspective also what would happen if you decreased it or if you increased it well above that. So other considerations. So when I look at, and I meant to put sponsored agencies, not supported agencies, but that was my fault. When we look at sponsored agencies took a particular hit, both during the year of 2020, and then also when we put the budget together, as did our departments. There was a significant reduction in all of their funding. So in this case, what I did is I looked at how did this fare and where's the funding differences between the sponsored agencies from 20, 21, and 22. This column right here is the 2020 adopted. So had we not had a pandemic, this is what you would have paid out to these agencies in the tune of $7.1 million. Obviously that didn't happen. We had some third and fourth quarter reductions, but nonetheless, we had a 12% reduction for 2021. And as you can see, here was the adopted numbers. And then 2022, we built in a 2% increase for those agencies. And then here's your year-to-date change from 22 to 21 to 22, the growth with those agencies based on that 2% growth. And here's your percent growth. This column shows you the comparison and how much funding actually decreased from 22 compared to what was adopted in 2020. And you can see that total here. And then obviously the percent change. Two things I want to draw your attention to, three things. This does not include the city sales tax portion that HSC and OAR get. So some of you that are familiar, there's a formula that HSC gets a certain amount of city sales tax based on prior year results. As with the same with OAR, it's a very little amount, but HSC is the bigger portion. So this does not consider what the city portion of sales tax goes to those agencies. If the city wants to do something similar to what we're doing, then that can be something that the city can reconcile with. But I'll show you what I mean in a second. So this does not include that. Also, the History Center, if you remember, 2021 was kind of a rebalancing year for them. In the past, we had provided them with rent payments. And then when the Tompkins Center for History and Culture was created, they then paid us back those rent payments. Well, this past year, we adopted the approach that the History Center would be the primary, basically super of the building. They would operate the building on our behalf, and therefore our contribution to them was significantly decreased. So while you see a 140% decrease in in 2022 compared to 2020, it's deceiving because this is the 2021 is their new baseline. You would never go back to that old funding level because you're no longer going to pay them rent, of which they're going to pay you back at. And also the rec partnership, you see a little bit of growth there. You see growth because during the budget process, we recommended that they be made whole because there's a tri-party, there's multiple parties that contribute to the rec partnership, the city and other communities. So we made that didn't actually receive a huge, any decrease through the 2021 budget process. When I take out the the rec partnership, and I take out the history center, you're at about a $660,000 difference, meaning agencies are getting $660,000 less than they were in 2020, what was expected to come to them in 2020. When I take that all into consideration, here is a recommended or a suggested approach that can provide some relief to those supporting those sponsored agencies based on a combination of two things. A consistent growth over the next several years in target funding, which is this orange area here, this red area. So some growth, 2 to 3 or 4%, depending on the year and out years, and offsetting the difference with the use of ARP funding or fund balance funding. So this is one-time funding. And as you continue to grow their target, you decrease that one-time funding. So at the end of the day, the total funding that is dedicated to sponsored agencies is really about what it was in 2020. Now keep in mind the decrease in the History Center, it makes up the difference between this mark and this mark. But as you can see, there is growth in out years, and you dwindle down the amount of one-time or ARP funding. And I've combined them both because I think they can be combined as you go on to out years, where the expectation is that, come 2027, 28, depending on how the economy changes and whether or not you want to increase target a little bit more in subsequent years, where they can wean off that one-time funding so that they're back to a full target base in a few years out. It's a method of ensuring that they total funding wise don't necessarily lose out significantly. In fact, they don't. But it's also not compromising, meaning you're committing to this huge target growth increase. It's saying, hey, listen, we have this additional funding coming to us, whether it's ARP funding or fund balance, we can available to front some of that so that the total funding amount, regardless of its target or one time, meets the funding levels that they were at pre-COVID, and then allows you to dwindle away and slowly wean off that as things improve, as your economy starts to improve in the out years.
So these would be like multi-year OTRs, and eventually they would be on the same trajectory that they were on pre-COVID.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Whether you call it an OTR or whether you call it appropriated fund balance, I'm not quite sure, but it's all the same money, the same at the end of the day. The point is you're seeing about a 1% growth year to year to year here. So it's a good, it's growth. It's not regression. It's fair and reasonable. And I think it's a good thing to look at now. And as the year goes on, you'll be able to change it. And as 2022 passes, you'll see how you fare and how 23 looks in 24. But the point is the concept is you're not rushing into increasing targets. So it's not going to impact your levy right away. And you have this surplus money, the stimulus money that you can spread out over time. You have fund balance. And when you look at the total amount that you're using here, it's 2.1 million. Okay, 2.1 million over 6 years is a manageable amount, even if, just from general fund balance, to be able to spread that out, knowing that your intent is to get off of it and that you are not going to continually subsidize it with one-time money. You're going to slowly grow the target over time. Now that target impacts your levy, right? So in order to balance that, you have your other revenues in your general fund have to grow. Otherwise, you're just going to be increasing your tax levy by itself to support this type of growth. So it allows you to monitor revenues, and hopefully as revenues start to grow outside of levy, you can then build some target in and then slowly get off the one-time money.
Jason, so you're saying that the total amount, those three colored bars, those three colored blocks will represent, and assuming the agencies don't care where it comes from, but this is the multi-year commitment. So, but it represents an annual funding increase of 1% a year?
Total, about that, yeah.
But they've been used to 2% a year.
Only the past few years, yeah. I mean, I'll be honest, Martha, if people think that they can go back to pre-COVID times right away, I think they have to get their expectations recalibrated. 1%, if we're talking about giving them a 1% growth in funding and that they're going to go back to their pre-COVID funding, I think that's pretty generous and reasonable. And I think before you jump into anything, you see how the first year goes. If you feel that you can do a little bit more in future years, and you do that. I also want to put out there that your department's cut 47 positions. So I think it's probably reasonable to expect that you're going to have some position restoration that's going to come to you this fall for budget. So yeah, is it not 2%? Well, 2% wasn't hard and fast. There were some years they had 2, there were some years they didn't. And a 1% growth on average in out years is probably pretty reasonable at this point in time. If revenues continue to exceed expectations, you recalibrate this. I mean, this is by no means should be set in stone now. It should be reviewed and focused if this is a model you want to take on in future years. See how the year goes, 2021, then change it for 22 and so on and so forth, and you tweak it. The point is I think it's possible fairly reasonably well to be able to help restore funding to them to pre-COVID levels, still put some growth in there, and still be able to survive and help them restore and grow into future years.
So I like this a lot, but let me ask, so this, you mentioned the city sales tax, and the city sales tax took a big hit
Yep.
in 2020 as well. Is that, how were you figuring?
I'm not.
Okay.
I expect the city who had that 16 or 17 million can pony up the difference and can help the agencies out.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And what's the total amount, if you add up the sort of gold bars?
The gold bars right here, 2.1 million.
Oh, I
So
see. That's a combination of fund balance and ARP. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and I kind of use them interchangeably because we don't know how ARP's going to be used. We know the time frame is the end of 24. You don't know. My gut, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. My gut is that you can claim as much as you can through a variety of venues now, and then once you get it, it's a little bit flexible as to how you can use it. So if that sits in your fund balance, great. Then you can use it discretionarily, with more discretion than you could if you applied for it directly through the ARP, through our program. So I think it gives you flexibility. The point is, I think there's a way of doing this successfully that doesn't leave them significantly shortchanged. When I look at this number here, the library took a big hit, bigger than, significantly bigger than most. HSC took a big hit when you look at all they've done here, and they've done a lot of work throughout this. So, I mean, some of your agencies took some pretty big hits, and how, soil and water, again, these are larger groups. How can you help restore that as you move forward and balance it without really, you jumping into a huge tax levy increase or having to sacrifice other services?
Thank you. That's smart. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you. I talked to just, Kathy Slaughter was aware that I was going to approach this a little bit. I talked to her the other day a little bit about it. And I think it's something to talk more about come budget time when we have a little bit more information on this, but I think it's doable. So tourism program, the other program that I think took the hardest hit than most is tourism. And that's across the board, across the nation. This is probably an industry that really took a major hit. So what I did here is I looked at the same type of approach. I took a 2020 adopted. Now, the only difference with tourism is that we don't put levy money. This is solely money you earn through room taxes, money that goes out the door. And that's the way I think it should stay. But I think there's some interim things that you can do to help get back to that point. The 2020 budget, this is what tourism program had less. I mean, I'm excluding the 10% admin. I'm excluding the support we give to the planning department that you support that with tourism money. And I took out the IAED contract because we no longer use tourism money to support that. That's all supported by the levy this year. And I took out the city conference center contribution because that's not, we're not going to subsidize that. So this is just tourism program, and here's the recipient, and here's the activity line. And based on the 2020 actual budget, or 2020 adopted budget. And then here is the 2020 actual budget. Obviously, huge difference, massive hit here. And then the 2021 adopted budget, which is, I think Nick Hemholt did a great job of trying to predict and, with no foresight ability to foresee anything as to what we think this will be. And then basically the 2022 budget assumed a 25% growth over the 21 budget. And that is based on some industry reports that he's been able to acquire and review about what we think, what type of growth you're going to see by the end of 22. And I would say, you're probably going to hopefully see, if the CDC guidance that came out today that was discussed is any indication, hopefully things will start to normalize a little bit. You'll start to see more domestic travel, start to see some of these things improve, more mass gatherings to the extent that it's manageable. Nonetheless, we think there's some decent growth to come in 22. However, 22 versus 20, I wanted to show the shortfall in it, and for the most part, there's a $660,000 shortfall in revenue that was not, when you look at 22 versus what 20 is. Now, mind you, we have some growth here in 22 to still happen. So I took and applied the same type of approach with the tourism program. Now, the difference here is that the red part here, the orange part, isn't levy growth. It's not target growth. It's expected, market growth in your room tax. So while we assume a 25% growth in 25 and 22 over 21, and possibly a 20% growth in 23 over 22, the expectation that's all been discussed is the 24 timeframe. 2024 is when you might see, back to pre-COVID, travel. I mean, that's what the airport's talking about. Hopefully, travel resumes to that pre-COVID timeframe. Maybe not. Point being is assuming you have some decent growth in these next 3 to 4 years, there's some gaps here in availability of funding. So in this case, I did the same type of logic that we did with the sponsoring agencies and sponsored agencies, and plugged it a little bit with some, stimulus or ARP or fund balance funding for the next 2 years until they get back to a kind of a pre-COVID number, where you see some growth here in 24. That's a little bit more than the 20 adopted number. This is what they would have expected in 2020. And then hopefully you'll see that growth continue into out years. And go back on the trajectory that it was before, which was, really, really doing well. So this is a little bit less of a subsidy, but same concept applied, probably less predictable than the sponsored agencies, because you have really no control over what growth happens annually, where with the sponsored agencies, you could increase your target as you see fit. So this is a little bit more guesstimating. Hopefully, we were really wrong on our projections this year, and it's not going to be this, it's going to be this, right? But it's just too early to tell right now. Generally, what happens is, around August, when we're getting ready to finalize the budget, I talked to Nick, we talked to maybe some of the hotelers, we see how July performed and the year, January through July. And hopefully, he's been pretty good about projecting when he looks at data. Hopefully this number is going to be a little bit higher. And maybe this is not going to be a hard stretch here as much as we think, but nonetheless, I think you can apply the same approach to tourism program so that these programs don't, take such a significant hit. And then as that room tax continues to grow, you can slowly wean off using one-time money to support them. So it's the same approach. In this case, it's about $1 million that's being projected to being used and over the next 2 to 3 years. And again, this is something to be recalibrated and reviewed, annually based on performance. And hopefully, like I said, hopefully these numbers recover quicker. We just don't know right now. So again, same potential, same approach as with the sponsored agencies. One thing I did not factor in any of this, and this is something to probably be worked out a little bit more without getting into details, only because we can't at this point, is some entities fared well during the pandemic, or better than others. They had certain reserves, or they had PPP funds, and some didn't. I have not factored any of that into this discussion or thought process. It probably can be as we get more down the road if this is something we want to subscribe to. But that isn't anything I even got into with this. This is really just really on a higher level right now before we get into the weeds of it.
Well, don't you think that the STP board could take that sort of factor into account when they make awards?
I think so. I mean, you have a very robust group of people there that are pretty engaged, and I would imagine, this would be a good time to tap into them. They did a lot of work, throughout the pandemic to try to gauge impacts of agencies. So I think you have a resource there that can help with this.
Jason, would we also do that for the Human Services Coalition group? And since many of them receive CARES money?
I think you can. I'll be honest, I think it's going to get inherently complex when you try to assess and create an objective way to say you did better than you, and these are the reasons why. So I think that's a harder thing to do, but there's probably some ability to apply hardship. But you have two groups that kind of filter a lot of that, and that is HSC and on the human service side of things, and your STVB on your tourism side of things. So I think you can rely on them to have, to talk a little bit more about that. But you'll find that it's going to get inherently complex to keep it objective. So nonetheless, I think it can be done. I think it can be done in a good way. And I think you can continue to support these programs despite the shortfalls in revenue that you've seen. But yes, HSC is a group and the sponsored agencies that we would take the same approach with. So as far as recommendation, I kind of threw a lot at you right there. The recommendation I would going into the budget is to approve a levy increase equivalent to the MOE, which is the maintenance of effort, which is a 1.89% levy increase. I think, yes, using some level of fund balance or ARP funding when we know more about it is something to consider, particularly with agencies in tourism. I say 1.3 because that's what the first year that we propose is. My guess is that number will change. But if the concept is acceptable, then I think that's how we would approach, that's how I would approach the fall budget is how do we help make these groups, total budget wise, total funding wise, somewhat equivalent to 2020, but knowing that there's some one-time money in there that will hopefully get less in future years. Sales tax is going to be a big part of this, right? Sales tax will play a big part as to how this levy number is impacted, I think. Because if that comes in and things really start to kick up in the economy, we could really overshoot our sales tax estimate, which only does several things. Number one, it helps the current year out in terms of generating a surplus, but also elevates the bar as to what we could expect in the next year, which may impact the levy in a positive way, decreasing it. The opposite is true if we don't see that return. And then use ARP funding for one-time uses like what we've proposed here, but also county needs should take priority. So when we talk about capital needs, those types of things, we should understand what they are so that we can use those funds to the best of our ability to minimize some of our structural debt costs around capital improvements.
Jason,
Yep.
in all of this, have you figured changes from the state budget? You talked about like DSS mandates.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there are a lot of different places where state money is going to flow differently, meaning more than we have had in the past, at least for like a year or two.
So the state money that we're aware of has been incorporated in here. If there's different mandated programs that are going to have different state money, keep in mind a lot of the ARP funding that is quote unquote county eligible is really formula based pass through to individuals, or it's going to be formula based. So we have limited influence over it. In every arena of our departments, whether it's Office for the Aging, whether it's social services, whether it's workforce development, all of them have their own circles that are monitoring the ARP outlay. And really, there's not a lot of whole information being shared right now. But the information that we know today has been influenced or has been put into this retreat. I will say that I think a lot of it is going to be formula based and will be one-time impacts. I don't think it will be permanent impacts to your structural budget. So from that context, it may not impact your bottom line as much, particularly if it's a year or 2 years. And if it's a pass through to individual benefits, you're not going to see any impact to it, to your budget. Put it that way, to the county budget. It will impact the individual recipients, but it won't impact our budget.
Thank you.
Yep, that's a good question. So factors, I always like to put some factors to keep in mind as you have this conversation. One, the American Recovery Plan funding. We're all holding, I'm actually thankful that nothing came out between Sunday and today, because if it would really screw my presentation up if it did. I was Kevin and I were kind of joking like, if it doesn't, yeah, Kevin and I were like, God, I hope it doesn't come out right now, because I really don't want to scramble. It'll screw up my whole presentation. The guidance is expected to come. My guess, and what I've talked with my colleagues and what we've talked around with our folks, is that it's probably going to be how do you apply for as much as you can based on your losses and COVID expenses, get that reimbursement, the tracking and then is limited or ceases after that. And then it becomes flexible funding for you, which I think is the best position for us to be in. There is a lot of other funding for a lot of different agencies and businesses in this ARP plan. So, you know, when I say look at county's needs first, I mean, look at your needs first. What is most important to the county's needs as you start to using this funding versus, you know, using it where other folks can find other avenues. Restoration of departmental funding. You know, we reduced 47 FTEs this year because we had to, because that was, you know, not knowing what the future was. You're stretched thin in some departments. There's going to be some FTE replenishment that's probably going to be needed. And in fact, I think at Budget Capital and Personnel next week, we might have one or two to kind of start to address some of those issues. But I would expect in the fall that you're going to see some requests for additional positions to be reinstated just because of how short the workforce has been cut in certain areas. County workforce investment, you've had a decent amount of retirements. That means you have new workforce coming on. I don't think you should lose sight of training needs. We've got a really good approach that I think was taken well before I got here, which was kind of have a big, robust fund of training funds in HR. Kind of as we went through the budget process, we would try to figure out how to resize that. But I think you don't want to lose sight that you know, you could probably use a good 5 years of good heavy investment in training needs, particularly as you have new members coming into the workforce, new leaders coming into new supervisory positions, so on and so forth. So I think it's an honorable mention here. I don't want you to lose sight of it. Multi-year projecting, do the best you can with what you have. We continue to try to look forward, you know, 6 months, 2 years at a time. Use of fund balance, we don't know how 2020 fared yet. You know, Rick is still finalizing the audits. I don't expect there to be a huge change in unassigned fund balance by that. You know, if it's $1 million or $2 million off, that's okay. But you know, certain things did help our financial position. One, we had a hiring freeze, and we didn't fill positions. That was huge. The consortium gave you a 1 month holiday. That was huge. The EF map enhancement that we got, you know, from July to the end of the year, that was big. TCAT had a holiday give back. That was big. All of that adds up. So, you know, if you didn't have any of that, yeah, we would have had a significant deficit. I think those types of actions are going to balance this out so that if there is a shortfall, I don't think it'll be significant. I think it'll be manageable, or you break even for the year, which is okay as well. So that's yet to be determined, but you know, that'll also provide some flexibility when we talk about some of this one-time funding for different options. Capital infrastructure needs, I don't think this goes away. And so I don't think it goes away. I think you have an infusion of additional resources that I personally would suggest you commit towards infrastructure needs as much as possible. That said, construction costs are going to increase because everyone is going to be doing infrastructure projects. So material costs are going up, supply is limited, labor is limited. So expect your costs to go up as you go through this. Nonetheless, these are important improvements. Your county office building, your energy policy, so your green facilities initiative, sheriff's building, we're going to be doing $4 million worth of work this year. At some point in time in the next 5 years, the intent was to push pause on a new one and see how the next 4 or 5 years phase out with, pan out with discovery and what the demands are for size of a jail. TC3, they may not need help now, but they definitely have to go through a master capital planning exercise to see where they need to invest. TCAT, you know, there's going to be probably some level of investment over the next 5 years in a TCAT facility. Your roads and bridges, again, probably one of the more robust county programs in the state when we talk about investing in roads and bridges. That should continue. It's great investment. Jeff does a great job, I think, in managing that and getting the best bang for your buck. And the Bridge New York money, the Pave New York money, all of this is good stuff that we should continue to capitalize on. And then kind of a new twist in things is rural broadband, right? I mean, rural broadband has kind of come into the utility world right next to gas, electric, water, and sewer. Yeah, and then that's where I put broadband now. If we've seen that over the past year, and the ARP funding, distinctly puts it right next to water and sewer investments. And you have some rural needs here, some remote needs. So that kind of works its way into the infrastructure discussion. We have a good study going on right now that will hopefully open the door to some new opportunities, or at least understand what needs to be invested in. There's still some other money floating around. There's going to be other money floating around. CDBG money that can possibly be used for broadband. So nonetheless, I put that under infrastructure need because I think it fits into that realm right now. Real quick, I don't think there's nothing new in here about the American Recovery Plan. This is taken right off of the NISAC and NACO website. So just as a refresher, these funds can be used to respond to the public health emergency, COVID-19 expenses, other negative impacts, but not limited to, just about anything and everything. I think it fits what we're recommending in this retreat. I think it fits under this criteria. Government services, to the extent we had reduction in revenue, again, I think it's a recoupment of revenue. Investments, water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. Just a little bit of history about water and sewer. The last time you had a major federal investment in water and sewer was probably 40, 50 years ago. So that's why you see a lot of aging infrastructure that's never been replaced, because the federal and state subsidy of it has been reversed over the past 40, 50 years. So it's the first major investment there. And state and local funds can transfer it to public benefit corporations' transportation needs. So similar to our relationship with TCAT, although TCAT did get a healthy dose of our funding and CARES funding as well. Guardrails, it says states are not allowed to use it to directly or indirectly offset reduction in net tax revenue. I think that also applies to localities, meaning you can't take ARP and just eliminate your tax rate for a year. I think that's going to carry on over into the local side of things. And you can't deposit any pension funds. For New York, municipalities don't manage pension funds, but other states, municipalities do manage pension funds. So it's not an issue for us. It's an issue for the state. And obviously, if you don't, comply with these guidelines and guide rails, you got to pay back the money. That's yet to be seen, but nonetheless, it's there. And of course, I wouldn't want to end without, some friendly faces.
Thank you for that.
There you go.
Yeah.
That'll make us smile. Look at those
Thank
faces.
you, Jason, for that presentation. Okay, well, I know that we're going to have to kind of discuss what kind of a target we want. I'm going to suggest that we take a quick 5-minute comfort break before we move on to the next portion of our meeting. So I'll see y'all in 5.
Did Deborah just disappear? Where did she go?
Yeah, she was on and it looked like she just got kicked off. She'll probably be jumping back on soon.
Yeah, I'll watch for her to come in.
Martha.
Okay.
Deborah Dawson, here she comes.
Yep.
Sorry, y'all, I got booted off somehow. Okay. So, I guess we need to discuss this. Jason, do you want to reiterate your recommendation was the 1.79, 1.89?
Yeah, let me put it up again real quick.
Okay, great. But then I can't see anybody raising their hands.
I'll go to it and then I'll come back to it.
Okay, great.
Here it is. So it's the maintenance of effort. I'm recommending the maintenance of effort only right now for several reasons. I think that, I think you got to play out a little bit as to how things are going to fare, sales tax wise. A little bit. And I put 1.3 of fund balance ARP money in here. I think the approach would be conceptually, we agree with this approach and how do we do it versus a limited number because things may change based on what happens. Monitor sales tax, and then obviously what's going to happen with ARP funding, we don't know yet. So that's the recommendation. I think the big one is the levy number. And if there's interest in this approach, it may be worth coming up with a whereas that contemplates this concept to the extent possible, something along those lines.
Okay. So, okay, all right, Martha.
Thank you. Well, that's a lot of stuff, Jason. Thank you very much and Kevin and Rick and everybody else who worked on this. So impressive digestion operation. I guess I would like to see that table where you, and maybe at some point, or depending upon conversation here, I'd like to see that table where you have the different levels that if we did maintenance of effort or maintenance of effort plus 2%, the table I mean.
I can do it right now.
It's 1.89% MOE, 2.35% currently projected tax cap, and 2.67% I think was maintenance of effort plus. Yeah.
You have that memorized, Deborah? That was impressive too.
No, I take notes, Martha.
Okay. Yeah, that's the one. Okay, so 189 is what you're recommending.
Yes.
Okay.
Like I said, I think your cap is going to grow because it usually does, and I think inflation is going to impact that more than it has in the past.
But on the maintenance of effort plus the sort of things that you expect, what you call beyond maintenance of effort, that's 266.
Correct. It would be 266. About a 1.4 increase on the levy. Now, generally, how it's gone in the past is obviously if we think sales tax or other revenues are going to grow more, we would then bring this down as much as we can. To the that's generally how that relationship works. So as we go through the year, like I said, if things improve, then we would shave this off and we would come in under this to the extent we can.
Got it. Okay, thank you very much.
Can we take that? Yeah, so I can see everybody's little hand.
Sorry.
Okay. Mike, I see you.
Good, thank you. Jason, on casino revenues, you haven't budgeted them. I think that's fine. But we probably will get some, and that will go into fund balance, I assume. And that may give us some money so we don't have to increase the levy quite so much. So I'm kind of impressed with your presentation today.
Thank you.
And obviously the work that all of you worked done on it. And I think the 1.89% maintenance of effort is saleable when we talk to our constituents, that we're just paying what we need to according to our contracts and other things. So I think that's a good suggestion.
Anyone else? Gosh, we're uncharacteristically reticent tonight. No hands. All right, well, okay, I'm, as always, very impressed with the work that Jason and Kevin have done. And I think under all the circumstances, the 1.89% recommendation is a good one. Obviously bearing in mind that we may have to revisit it depending on where we sit in August, for example, with sales tax and other things. Martha.
So the issue is what is this? We can obviously end up voting more, but if we set it at 189 for maintenance of effort, but there are a number of things, that's the beyond MOE, that are probably going to be expected. How does, remind us how that affects what department heads will do? That will mean more OTRs, is that right?
Could, yes. It also means that there could be, OTRs for the target increase for the sponsored agencies as well.
So if we were to, okay.
If this were normal times, I would be all in favor of at least the 2.35 or maybe even the 2.66, but these are not normal times. And we need to understand that this is subject to a lot of change. My one concern is that we need to continue to bear in mind the cumulative impact of keeping each year's increase low. That would be my only misgiving. And, Jason, if you have some comment to make on that, I'd like to hear it.
Yeah. I think that's a good observation. I mean, you don't know how this is going to. So several things to keep in mind is, interestingly, your taxable assessed value continues to grow up. I mean, if any of you've been in the housing market the past 6 months, you will see it is unprecedented. It's unprecedented because the supply is so constrained, which is driving up prices even more than it's ever been in this community and across the country. So as your taxable assessed value goes up, your tax rate will go down likely. My expectation is that you will have another, this will be the 7th out of 8th consecutive, 8th year that you'll have a decreased tax rate because of growth in taxable assessed value, both in commercial and residential. That's good and bad. It's good in the sense that your property values grow up. It's bad in the sense that getting into the housing market can be more challenging on an individual basis, right? So that adds constraint to things. You're always trying to balance this the best you can and try to minimize that tax levy growth. And you may be in another position this fall, depending on how things fare. If it leans towards the positive direction, to say, you know what, we can handle a little bit more of an increase because taxable assessed value's gone up and other revenues have gone up. So we're willing to take on a little bit more budget-wise and keep that levy recommendation the same. But I think your intuition is right about trying to keep impacts minimal to the extent possible going over the next few years to see how people fare from a recovery perspective. This is going to hit everybody one way or another. And I think you want to try to make your impact as limited as possible. That said, I should be remiss if I didn't tell you, you're not the largest tax rate out there that property owners pay.
No, yes, we know that. There's school taxes.
There's school taxes, you have municipal taxes that are higher than yours in some places. So, when you look at the total tax bill on a median home for all the services you get in the county, that's a very reasonable amount of money on a monthly basis to getting the level of services that you get. So I don't want you to lose sight of that either. But I think your intuition is correct. You want to make it balanced. You want to make it manageable.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I see Leslie, Leslyn, and then Annie.
All right.
And Dan.
Just a couple questions about trends. And, sorry, my first run at this, so you guys tell me that doesn't play in, that's fine.
You're doing great.
About taxable assessed value, do you look at projected development growth and what that means on the, there's a lot of development that's happening right now or in the pipeline.
Right.
It's going to come out on the other side pretty quickly here and be occupied.
Yep. So that contributes, Leslie, to the constant growth and taxable assessed value. I will say a lot of the new growth is going to be piloted, so you will see that incremental growth over time. But it's safe to say that this real estate market, the taxable assessed value in this county is unprecedented, probably only comparable to a few counties in the state, Saratoga being one, maybe Westchester being the other.
Yeah.
So it does play into it, but it's not a determining factor when we talk about setting the levy, because all the taxable assessed value does is determine the rate. The levy is what's going to determine certain things. So.
And then for the pilots, do we have any that are graduating?
Yes, you have a lot of them that are cycling through, and I think the pilot money goes down this year, so you have more that are coming off than going on.
Okay.
So that's usually a guaranteed number because it's all based on a pilot agreement.
And then the only other thing is when you're looking at trends for the indicators of need, I was just wondering how we're considering the precarious position that Ithaca College is in and what that might mean for the community.
That's difficult to estimate.
Of course, you can't put a number to it, but I just don't know.
We've had some preliminary conversations. So, any loss of any major employer, if it was significant, may have some ripple effect. But I think it's really hard to say that any change in IC over a period of time is going to amount in this amount of impact. What it ultimately comes down to is buying power. Buying power of individuals, and then what maybe buying power of the organization. But it's if IC were to shut down tomorrow and everyone were to be unemployed, that would be one thing. You might feel that ripple, but I have a feeling it would be really difficult to be able to pinpoint what any industry would have, unless it's Cornell were to lay off half of its workforce tomorrow. That's going to have a ripple effect in the community that you're going to probably see noticeably. I don't know that you'll be able to notice it with IC, and they're filtering it out over a period of time.
Okay, Leslyn, Annie, Dan, Martha.
Thank you, Deborah. Last year, Jason, I was impressed, but this year, man, you blew it out the park. Go ahead with your bad self. That was very, very impressive. Thank you for all the thought and, just some of the strategies on how to get through this. Now, I want to, Martha sort of asked my question or made the comment. I mean, we usually come out of here with, what the recommendation is, and county administrators bringing us to 1.89, but the potential of OTRs and all of these things might move that dial up a little bit. And I'm just wondering if people are thinking that way, or if we're saying like, we want to stick with this 1.89 as our goal. We know that we'll come within, a few points above it. And then the other thing for me is, Jason, I don't remember, I think I had to take a quick phone call. What was built into what you presented around capital and deferred maintenance? Was there a number that we should be looking at for these projects?
So the increase in the capital contribution was 0.5%, so it was about $250,000.
And that's for any projects we're doing, as well as taking care of some of the deferred maintenance stuff?
Yes. So it supports the existing capital plan. And generally what happens now, Leslyn, and it's a little bit of a curveball this year with ARP funding, is that as we go to develop the budget, or as we go to develop the budget, you'll take into consideration possibly some increased, if that's, where the legislature goes on this, some increased funding that may help bring that debt down. And you may not have to, that may be an increase you don't have to do this year. And that may be able to throw 250,000 back, decreasing the levy, or possibly being able to do some of those other beyond maintenance of effort issues that come up.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah.
Okay, thank you, Leslyn. Okay, Annie, Dan, Martha.
Thank you for the presentation, Jason. I really like that, we're trying to keep our tax levy down. I mean, as far as, I think about it, combined with all the other property taxes and other taxes that we have to income, we are pretty heavily taxed here in New York State. So, but I really do see here that, you're trying to be conservative in your approach. So I appreciate that. I do also like the idea of using the one-time funding or multiple year one-time funding to subsidize the agencies that we support. And in that realm, I don't know if this is still true, but I know folks from the library have spoken before that they were never made whole after, I believe, the 2008 recession. So I don't know if there's any way we can look back on that, because it seems like we're just going from here on, and I just know that they have said that more than once.
I thought
And on top of it, they took a big hit, this year.
They did. I know there was this was before my time. I know there was a kind of a help that was given to the Tompkins County Public Library to help them get out of some financial challenges. I think there was a little bit of a program that was put forward years before I came here. I think when I came on board was the last year of it. So I don't know. I can't go far back. I think there was quite a bit of a structural deficit that was closed, and I think the county took some pretty proactive efforts to do that. So I don't know beyond that. I mean, we'd have to look at it. I know Kevin probably has some familiarity with it. That said, I mean, this approach that we're recommending is trying to make the level funding and that they have. They also, they do have some other funding sources that will probably require some recouping. Like I know they get a lot from the Friends of the Library, the book sale. And I would suspect that that's just not going to be as lucrative as it has in the past. So, I think it's going to just be something you're going to have to be open to considering and talking more about come budget time if there's anything above this approach. It's a big budget. It's an important budget. It's an important service they provide. But I don't know more beyond what we proposed with respect to bringing them up to the 2020 funding.
I'm
Okay,
sure
thank
that
you.
Amanda will be a capable advocate for the library, but I had thought that one of the complaints that they had was that their staff got behind the curve because of some negotiations of salary or something. And I thought we had given them a boost in the budget 2 or 3 years ago that was supposed to make up for that. So I guess that's something we need to look into. Amanda, if you have any thoughts on that now, I'd be.
I don't remember. I remember talking about that, yeah, when we first came on, but
Yeah.
I haven't heard. I mean, I don't feel like that's been a part of any discussion that I've been a part of in the past couple of years, that they feel that they're still recovering from before. Maybe they are, but yeah, I don't really know.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Dan?
Jason, you talked about position restoration, which makes sense. We lost quite a few positions from our roster. But how would that be paid for? If we're doing maintenance of effort, by definition, there's, we're not adding, and you can't use one time for positions. You shouldn't use one time for positions. So how should we think about all that?
I think it'll probably be some target increases that you'll have to consider when we talk about it. It's really early for me to be able to tell you that I think it's going to be these positions or that positions. I just think that it's, talking with departments, and some of them have really hit they're spread pretty thin based on some of these cutbacks and how things have changed. So I would say, Dan, it's probably going to be more target-based requests. There might be a few positions that may ask for target increases.
Well, if we expect that we don't know which ones yet, but if we expect that there will be, a certain number of target request increases for positions, should we consider that now as part of our goal?
You can. It kind of goes hand in hand with the other, the beyond maintenance of effort, Dan, discussion. For me to be able to tell you what would be a number I don't know, and without knowing what they are, that's usually a position by position discussion and consideration that the legislature has at the moment. You're not off by saying we can, I think it's reasonable to anticipate it. To be able to tell you should anticipate X, Y, and Z, that may be more of a priority discussion, Dan, at budget time when you're balancing everything in front of you with the budget.
Okay, I am chewing on this myself, and I'm asking, of course, my colleagues do too, that maybe that's the one thing that we can be reasonably sure that we will go over maintenance effort, and then maybe we should, build that number in right now. I know it'd be a guess, but I'll leave it there.
So Dan, that's a good point. I mean, what would we build in? Would we say 2% because it's a nice round figure, or would we go for the 2.35 because that's the projected tax cap? I'm open to discussions on that.
I don't know. I'm thinking out loud myself. Maybe we should think, we maybe will expect 5 more positions and estimate how much that costs us or something like that. I really don't know how to think about it.
Deborah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, if this addresses this particular point, Leslyn, why don't I let you jump in now, and Martha can go after you.
Now, I was just thinking, that's why I asked the question earlier, and I'm sorry I didn't wait for an answer, because I was fine with having that range from the 1.89 to the tax cap, the 2.3 or whatever it was that was said.
2.35.
Preliminary tax cap number to allow for exactly what Dan is talking about.
That makes sense, actually. Martha?
Well, I think that's what Jason gave us. I think that if I'm right, if I got my notes right, Jason, the 0.77% levy is what you expect in additional, like replenishment of staff, plus a couple of other things that would need to be restored. And that was going to be over a 3-year period. So it's essentially a third of what really would be full replenishment, if I got you right.
So generally, when you talk about target increase, it's usually identified, so in this instance, that beyond maintenance of effort, and Kevin, jump in if I'm not correct on this, but generally, that beyond maintenance of effort would increase, sponsored agencies by 2%. It would increase, the TCAD agreement by the 2% or whatever that is, and then it would increase, by the departmental restoration, which had a pre-identified amount, so it was X amount for, facilities in this area, X amount for human resources, X amount for social services, and so on and so forth. When you kind of get into a broad allotment of restoration, I don't know how we would appropriate that unless it's a discretionary move by, discretionary to the administrator to pick and choose, which, could be done. It creates a little bit of a Hunger Games, which is kind of interesting too. But I would maybe venture on the side of if you want to account for some level of restoration, look at the beyond the maintenance piece to it, and then deal with a position by position discussion based on how the departments present those budgets to you. So you can balance that on the whole budget proposal. I think that's, to be honest with you, is probably your safest and best approach. And it requires the administrator to balance all the requests they get in, and then be able to propose to you saying, all right, I recommend, here are the ones, the over target ones, and these are the reasons why, versus I don't recommend these. That's kind of part of the budget, budget development process. If you go and put a range of number out there, I think it's too ambiguous. And while I understand the intent of trying to identify in advance, I don't know that I would give that yet. Personally, my suggestion would be is let departments and let the administrator recommend to you what they think is the package and why. And if it's above target, then it's above target. Whether you make that decision now or you make that decision then, my recommendation from a fiscal prudence perspective is make that decision then, because things could turn sour, over the course of the next few months. And I would say, make that decision when you have the full budget package in front of you.
I would to build on that, you said that if we went to 1.89, I'm sorry, remind me how much is additional on each home, and then
$24, I think it was.
24.
Yeah.
And if it's 266, it's 31.
33, yeah.
$33 on a home. Understanding that going up to 266 does not restore everything. It does, like, maybe restores a third of what we cut. I will propose, I mean, whenever we get around to making motions, I think that's a supportable level. I think that if we cut that, if we undershoot the levy increase, I think we run the risk of doing what we did last year, where we kind of borrowed, took money out of the fund balance. And didn't you say, in a sense, the 1.89 is actually
Was the result of that.
the amount of money that we took out of the fund balance last year, right?
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, had we not used fund balance to offset the tax levy, you wouldn't have that proposed maintenance of effort, because you would have already built that capacity into your levy.
So, and I remember saying, well, we'll deal with that next year. This is next year. So, in a sense, the 189 is kind of level funding. It's not actually maintenance of effort. It's replacing what we didn't charge last year. If nobody else understands it, I think I understand what I just said. Anyway, I will move and support, when it's the time, we'll move and support 2.66. I think it's the responsible thing to do. I think our community and our staff kind of needs that commitment.
Fair point, Martha. Okay, Amanda.
Thanks. I think well, first of all, we don't want the Hunger Games. So let's just keep that out of it, Jason.
We had those last year.
We have enough stress in our lives. I think I am supportive of the 1.89. I think I'd prefer to wait and hear months from now what departments need and what they want, and then we can add and subtract at that point. I think that's all I want to say.
Okay, anybody else have anything to offer?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. We've got Henry. Did you have your hand up? Oh,
No.
Rick and Mike.
Mike, yeah, I know. Mike and Rick. I just called on Henry because he hadn't spoken yet. Mike.
Okay.
Shauna.
Three things. I'm following Jason's track, and I agree with him. The reason we have the over target process, and we developed it over the years, is simply so that the departments can make their case for an over target. I don't understand if we say, well, we'll make 5 positions. Well, which 5 positions? And does that mean that the administrator doesn't do what the administrator always does and say, well, here's an alternative way, instead of hiring someone, you might be able to restructure, for example, when the administrator is working on the budget recommendations. So I really think we should let the over target process continue to work here. Second, I just wanted to tell you about the library and the staffing there, because I have a lot of history there. That happened when the new library was built, and there was a full court press that they needed a lot more positions. They got quite a few more positions. I almost think 7 back then when the library opened. And then they lost them, certainly, at the time of the Great Recession, but we restored some of them, at least 2 or 3, I believe, over the years. So yes, when they talk about they never got back up to that level, it's true, but they've been on a house, a median house of $25, $24. I'd really like to see us put in parentheses after that what the actual tax on that median house would be versus what the increase would be. So if it's $1,800 versus $1,825, for example, I think that is a more honest way of people understanding it, because when you say it's $10, people don't think too much about it. But when they say it's $10, and Deborah, you're right about the cumulative cost of these things, people, I think, need to have the honesty. It's the same kind of honesty that we developed when we stopped talking about the tax rate increase and went to this discussion about the levy, which is the real spending that we have to do. So
Good
I
point,
just wanted
Mike.
to say those things.
Just so you know, we have that information. We didn't put it on that slide, but I can give it to you now that the 1.89% increase is a total tax bill of $1,266. The tax cap of 235% is $1,272. And the 266% is $1,275.
And that's on what level home? What cost?
200K.
200,000.
I just think that
No, it's a good point.
helps put it better in perspective.
Yeah, it's a good point. If the slide was bigger, we would probably include it.
But we might put it in our resolution that we adopt, for example.
Sure.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Okay, Shauna and then Rick.
Yeah, I think the 1.89 really makes sense. With all of the uncertainties, Mike's right about the OTR process for us to hear everything case by case and really make the decision. I don't think this is the year to really have the higher amount at this point. So I would support the 1.89. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Shauna. Rick?
Yes, I was just trying to remember about the library. We did some structural deficit changes when Joe Mariana was here in 2013, 14, 15. There was about a 3-year period. I think that was a time frame. And it echoes pretty much what Mike was saying. After the recession, they did have to cut back on some services and on some positions. By that time, the library had dug kind of a hole with a negative fund balance. We had the same problem at the airport simultaneous. They had a negative fund balance. And they went into some studies, and Joe was able to come up with a phased in structural deficit repair plan for the library. And so for over the next 3 years, I think it was 14, 15, and 16, we took out of our fund balance money and gave extra to the library for 3 successive years in order to help them come back up to a positive fund balance, with the understanding that they too would get a bit more funding from outside in maybe not bring all their staff back as quickly as what they thought. So it was a phased in approach over 3 years to bring them back into the black. It did work, and it did make them solvent, and they have a much better financial position today as a result. But I do remember that structural deficit plan that the county administrator had brought, and that the legislature signed off for each of 3 years to give them extra funding. And then on the heels of that, and I'll end with this, about a year after that, you have to remember, we floated bonds for $300,000 to do capital improvements at the library. And that was accomplished back in 2018, 2019. So we just gave them another $300,000, which we floated the bonds, and we're paying the debt on those bonds. We're supposed to be getting a grant to cover that cost. It's taken us 3 years, and we still haven't gotten that grant money back from the state. We're very close. We think we're close to getting a check from the state for that, but we've been waiting 3 years to get reimbursed for part of that bond program for the library. I just thought I'd add that. to your library discussion.
Well, that checks in the mail, Rick, along with the Medicaid reconciliation.
Right.
So it doesn't seem like the library is particularly disadvantaged. Rich?
I'm good with the 1.89. I'm sure we will massage that in the fall. I also wanted to comment on an earlier question about pilot programs. And I think there's some interesting information we could get in terms of the projects that are coming off of pilot. So we see some sense of trend in terms of change, because really we've seen a long-term expansion, very, very significant expansion in build out in our downtown core. And a lot of those projects are coming off of pilot. They're down to the very small inducement level, like small percentage, maybe 20, 10%. And my guess is that several of them will be adding fairly significant tax base. I also have some information on City Center that came up at legislative meeting, but I can report that separately. Thanks.
Thank you, Rich. Can Heather or someone from IDA supply that information?
Yeah, we can get it.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So just conceptually keep in mind that when things come off pilot, while you lose pilot payments, you gain taxable assessed value.
Right.
So I'm sure Jay or we can work with Heather to get you some information about what's coming off, and then what's coming on depends on the development potential of what's coming up.
Okay. Martha, then Annie.
Right, but usually it's not a huge difference because they've been paying, they pay incrementally more every year. So it's not usually a vast difference. Jason, if we were to build in, you've got built into the agencies, the sponsored agencies, 1% growth a year. If we instead were to build in 2% growth a year, you know what the dollar difference would be there?
I don't, but that would be, so just to clarify, the target increase is 2%, 3%, 4%, 3%, 3%, 2% between 22 and 27. The total funding growth is about on average 1%. It varies from year to year. So that's really a one-time allotment discussion, not a target discussion unless you want to make a target. So the target built in there is 2% plus, but the total funding is a little bit less.
Because you're using one-time money to cover the gap.
Right.
Okay. All right, Deborah, are you ready to entertain a motion or?
Well, I'd like to hear from Annie, and then if Glenn or Dave or Henry have anything they want to offer, I'd like to hear it, and then I'll entertain a motion.
Okay.
Okay, Glenn.
I'm happy with 1.89.
Okay, thanks. Dave?
Yeah, I think the 1.89 is a good starting spot, and we'll see where it goes from there. I'm sure we're gonna.
It'll go up is where it'll go from there.
Yeah, it can only go up. It will not go down.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Annie?
I'm good with the 1.89 too.
Okay. Henry?
I'm good with the 1.89 too.
Well, Martha, you can make your motion, but it sounds to me like we have consensus around 1.89.
Maybe, I think that's right. But I think, Jason won't be around to deal with all the OTRs. So it'll be somebody else's headache.
So it's easy for him to make that recommendation, right?
Maybe. I hear you on this. I just feel like especially the agencies, I know I don't know if it's a bleeding heart thing, or maybe I'm just channeling Julie Kiefer because she's on my mind because I want to do that resolution Amanda wants. I really feel like they have carried this community. The nonprofits have just carried this community on like crawling on hands and knees and just keeping people on their backs. And I don't know that we've really truly recognized the contributions that they've made with people just, staff who aren't paid well in the first place, and really bore so much stress and so much of the pain of the community, and carried everybody along. So I won't make a motion that won't go anywhere, but I really am sensitive to, I feel like it's important to really be honest about our responsibilities and commitment to the community. And I would have supported more, but I won't vote against 189.
Okay. Dan?
Isn't it true that we just do a straw poll at this meeting usually?
Yes,
Yes.
that's right.
All right, good. But then we do put that into a resolution, which we have a special BCP meeting just before the next legislature meeting. So bear in mind that you can get away with a straw poll tonight, but not on May 4th.
Oh,
Right.
we're not an official meeting.
I'm sorry?
It's not an official meeting, so that's why we do the straw poll.
Right, okay,
Right.
yeah. All right, so let's just go around and everybody can say where they want to end up, and I will keep track. Mike Lane.
The 1.89.
Okay, and Dan.
2.66.
Okay, Martha.
2.66.
All right, Rich.
1.89.
Leslin.
The tax cap, I believe that's a 2.35.
Yes, ma'am, it is. Annie.
1.89.
Dave.
1.89. And I think we ought to put some kind of terms on Jason's departure, that he shows up for the meetings.
Yeah. Glenn.
1.89.
Amanda.
The Hunger Games. Oh, I mean, 1.89. 1.89.
Donna. You're muted.
Sorry.
And mask.
1.89.
Okay. Leslie.
1.89.
Okay. Henry.
1.89.
And I'm a 1.89. So that's 10 for 1.89, 2 for 2.66, and 1 for 2.35. And I guess we'll be revisiting this issue at our next legislature meeting. Does anybody have anything else?
So that was 13 people, or I didn't notice. Are we missing?
Mike, well, I didn't count actually. Mike Sigler, who said he was in favor of the maintenance of effort, which is 1.89. So that's actually 11.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for reminding me, Annie. Okay, is there anything else or are we done?
I think we're about done.
Right now.
Lots of thank yous to Jason and Kevin and Rick and.
Yes, as always, Kevin's amazing. And Jason and Rick aren't bad either. So thanks, everybody.
You're a great team. Thank you.
All righty.
Have a good
Good
night.
night.
everyone.
Right.
Good night.
Night all.